Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do a Friday Reads video where I wrap up the week in reading and talk about any bookish things that have gone on during the week, sometimes non-bookish things that have gone on during the week. If you would like to skip over the chatty portion at the beginning of the video, there will be a timestamp in the description box so you can skip to the Friday Reads portion. I did finish 3 books this week and I'm feeling pretty excited about that, and I think they're very interesting books. I also had a bit of a complicated reading week because I had a really hard time settling on a physical book to read. We'll talk about that when we get to the actual Friday Reads portion of the video. You might notice Teddy is missing. I am actually filming this video for the second time. I'll explain why in a moment. But when I first started filming, he was actually in this chair. I had gotten him to sit there when I did my book haul for this week, which will be linked in the description box down below if you'd like to check that out. I got him to sit there. It was adorable. I loved it. And I thought it would be a good solution because he seems a little confused a lot of the time when you try to get him into your lap. He doesn't like to sit still all that much, especially when the weather is nice. And we've had such weird weather. It was freezing, then it got scorching hot, and now it's cooled down considerably. I don't understand. But anyway, when the weather is a little bit nice, he likes to roam. He doesn't like to sit still. I get it. So I figured the chair would be an easier solution, but he was really not into it. Actually, I think I still have the footage because I don't think I've deleted the video yet. So I'll just insert him walking away. Just watch. Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do a Friday Reads video where I wrap up the week in reading and talk about any bookish things that have gone on during the week. I got my buddy Teddy, who is gonna leave me, actually. I tried. Yeah. I got dissed. It's true. But anyway, that's why there is no Teddy. We'll try to get him when Joel and I film our June wrap up and do our best books of 2024 so far video. We're hoping to do that very soon. So stay tuned for that. And we'll try to get him involved so you can actually see him and not just him leaving me in a clip. So it's the final week of June, which means it's the final week of Pride Month. And although Pride reading is not really contained to June, you can read for Pride all year long. You can read queer stories and queer authors all year long, and I encourage you to do that. I did definitely want to mention it. I am actually wearing a shirt in honor of Pride, and I only just realized now you can't see it where I'm sitting. So let me show it to you. It is Let the Queens Read. This is done by an artist named Trans Painter, or who goes by the name Trans Painter on Instagram. They do all these beautiful drawings of flowers, and a lot of them with sort of rainbow patterns and motifs to them, or other members of the LGBTQ plus community. They actually designed a sort of mural that is on the facade of the Montana Book Company these days. So really beautiful art. I love it. And they had done this specifically in response to protests about drag queen story hours last year. So I'm wearing it now. And I really specifically wanted to nod to the end of Pride. In the first version of this Friday Reads video, I spent a lot of time talking about politics and I got very passionate and involved about it. And I started thinking as I was filming, you know, this is probably going to turn a lot of people off. And it stinks that you kind of have to think about that, because I think the reason this election is so stressful for me is that there's a lot on the line. And there's a lot on the line for me specifically as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. Because it feels like, it doesn't feel like, it's true. There have been a lot of laws proposed and passed to curtail the rights of the LGBTQ plus community. Most of them are targeted at the transgender community, which is not me. However, it's essentially my cousin as part of the LGBTQ plus family. And I don't know about you, but I feel protective of my cousins. And there's also a knowledge in the back of my mind that if they are coming for my cousin, they're going to come for me next. And that's pretty scary. I like being married. I like not being discriminated against if I want to seek employment or housing. I want to be able to be a foster parent. You know, not a lot of straight people are stepping up to be foster parents. Let's be real about this. I don't want my rights to be taken away. And that is on the line. And so much more is on the line. You know, it feels like we are on the brink of terrible things. with this election in the United States. And you don't have to be excited about Joe Biden, but I do think you should be invested in voting against fascism. So it's not really a choice to me. But hey, maybe you disagree. I don't even like to read books that are dystopian. You can imagine I don't want to live in one either. So all that to say, register to vote. Don't sit this election out. If you are of voting age and eligible to vote in the United States, register to vote. If you are registered, just double check your registration status. I actually double checked my registration status this morning, and I am registered to vote. So that's great. I will have a link to vote.gov in the description box down below. It was really quick to do it. It took about a minute of my time to just double check for my own peace of mind that I am a registered voter. And I'd encourage you to do so. And if you're not registered, get registered. And if you're thinking that you want to sit this election out, don't. Too much is on the line. And if you don't feel like a lot is on the line, please think about people you know and maybe even people you don't know who feel very invested and feel like their lives and livelihood are on the line. And don't sit it out. So let's get into the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. As I said, I finished 3 books, but the story of my reading this week, and by the way, Teddy just came in and has fallen asleep on the floor next to me. So if you hear puppy snores or snoring, you're not crazy, it's him. But the story of my reading this week was that I really had a hard time deciding what I wanted to read next. And a lot of that has to do with, part of it is anxiety, obviously. That's a huge thing. I feel like I've been difficult to please a bit with books, and I've had a hard time finding books that I'm really into in 2024, certainly more than I did in 2023. But I had a really hard time finding where on the spectrum I wanted to read. Like, some of the books I tried to pick up were a little bit too serious. Some of them felt a little too frivolous. And I'm not going to talk about all of the things that I tried to pick up. I will highlight one, and then I'll talk about a DNF, and then we'll get into the books I actually finished. Just to give you an example of everything that I kind of went through trying to find what my next book would be. So, as I said, some things felt a little too frivolous, some things felt too serious. So I really needed that middle spot. I was like Goldilocks with books. I was, as I joked to Joel, I was Goldibooks this week. And I'm going to try to make that a thing. Let's all make Goldibooksing a thing. When you can't decide what you're in the mood for, and you need, you don't want something too serious, but you don't want something too fluffy. You got to find that perfect middle ground. And that is what I was looking for this week. So let's talk a little bit about my Goldibooksing process. So at the end of my last Friday Reads video, I held up a pile of books, and I didn't show you what the books actually were. So I did attempt to read 3 of those, and I tried a couple of other things. I really had a hard time. I kept stopping and starting. That is a thing that happens to me a fair amount because I'm a mood reader. Sometimes I'll get like 15, 20 pages into something and just think, I'm not in the mood for this right now, and I'll put it down. And to me, it's not even really worth talking about because I didn't get far enough into the book. The reason I'm talking about it now is that kind of was the story of my reading week for a long time. I didn't really settle into a book, like a physical book, until Tuesday. And there were a lot of false starts. The first one is actually a library book. And the fact that it's a library book is part of what made me try this direction. And again, ordinarily, I wouldn't talk about this. I really didn't think I was going to talk about this. It's The Breakup Lists by Adib Khorram. This is a young adult romance book, and I thought that might be a fun thing to do. Also, I do feel like I was in a bit of a rut where I read a lot of books about gay men or the gay male perspective. And as I mentioned before we got to the Friday Reads portion, the community is a lot bigger than that. So I felt like I really needed to get out of that box and explore other things. And this is a gay couple at the center of it. Actually, one of them might be bisexual for all I know, since I didn't get very far into it at all. But the protagonist, the one person who narrates the story, is deaf. And there is a non-binary friend character in it. So that felt like enough to make this stand out and feel like something, but I just felt like the book was too clever by half in the beginning, like to the point where it just kind of started to feel annoying to me. That's my perspective. You might feel differently if you picked it up. Again, I love the idea of the representation that is in this book. It just didn't feel like something I want to read right now. So ordinarily I wouldn't even talk about it because I only made it about 20 pages into the book, but I wasn't able to get to the library to return this book before today, so I still have it, and I figured it's part of my Goldibooksing journey. So one of the things that felt too clever by half is that it does this thing where it uses strike-throughs to sort of pivot in a different direction, where instead of calling someone annoyingly handsome, you call them classically handsome. Felt way too clever. And the characters feel a little like they're trying to be clever in a lot of situations. And the thing that really kind of made me say I'm not in the mood for this is this. After Cameron's monologue, Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird, which remains his favorite play despite all the racism and N-word and white saviorism stuff. And the thing is, To Kill a Mockingbird is an anti-racist book. Is it perfect? No. I have a whole video about To Kill a Mockingbird and the white savior conversation. I'll link it down below, so I don't want to get into it too much here. However, in my opinion, To Kill a Mockingbird is not a white savior story. First of all, this is semantics, but Atticus Finch doesn't actually save anyone. He loses. He loses badly, and it doesn't go well. So the savior aspect falls on its face in To Kill a Mockingbird. And that is actually the point of To Kill a Mockingbird. The person who actually does step up and try to be a savior fails. That's very much the point of To Kill a Mockingbird. And I also think the point of To Kill a Mockingbird is that Atticus Finch is very much treated as an exception. To Kill a Mockingbird goes out of its way to show that he is an exceptional person. Like, he's very unique for doing what he does. The majority of the people in Maycomb were very happy sitting on the sidelines if they agreed with him. They were very happy to let him be the standard bearer while they sort of sat on the sidelines. Have I mentioned, don't be complacent, register to vote, don't sit out this election? Like, that is the type of person you will be. So most of the citizens of Maycomb who do agree with Atticus Finch are willing to stand by and let bad things happen. And that's the point of To Kill a Mockingbird. We don't have to litigate the whole thing, but that is kind of the thing that convinced me to be like, yeah, I'm not into this book at all. You do not besmirch To Kill a Mockingbird in this house. And I'll have that video down below to talk more about it. So I tried one or two other books. They weren't very successful. And finally, I thought, all right, well, what if I try returning to messy gay territory? Because I loved In Tongues by Thomas Grattan. Check out last week's Friday Reads video down below if you want more about that book. So maybe I'll try The Intoxicating Mr. Laval by Neil Blackmore. And this actually counts as a DNF because I got far enough into it that I have to count it as a DNF. And my problem with this one was that it felt like characters made abrupt about faces in ways that did not make sense kind of fundamentally, but worked for plot twists. And that just seems like the kind of book that this is. And when I looked into reviews, it seems like that's the rest of the book is just going to be that type of thing where people don't necessarily behave in a way that makes sense, but do behave in a way that makes sense for a plot twist. And the big example of that, the thing that really made me say, you know what, I don't want to read this. And actually, I am planning to unhaul this. It's going to be going to my local used bookstore. Is that you have protagonists who are brothers, and this is historical fiction. They are sent on tour. Their father is a merchant, and their mother is trying to groom them and educate them to help the family penetrate the aristocratic class. So she educates them, and now she's sending them out on tour. And the idea is that they will meet elite members of society and make contacts that they can bring home. And then maybe over time, the family can become part of that elite class. So they get to Paris and quickly meet other English people who are on tour as well. And these people become their friends and hang out with them like all the time, every day, and invite them to parties and get them into parties and introduce them to a lot of people. And they start getting cards inviting them to come call on people, which is a thing people used to do. But then one of the people that they've made friends with all of a sudden turns really mean and laughs at the narrator of the book and essentially says, "I can't believe you thought we were your friends." The implication is that they were laughing at them the whole time. Or maybe that the other people that they invited them to were also laughing at them. But it doesn't quite go there. Like, it doesn't explain what the prank really is, because it kind of seems like they actually gave them everything they wanted, which is that they introduced them to a lot of members of high society and helped them get their foot in the door that way. So, and it was just a weird flex. And it just seems like this is the type of book that's going to be doing twists without care for whether or not it makes sense. And I'm not really into that right now. So Goldibooks said no to the intoxicating Mr. Laval. I did get far enough into it that this counts as a DNF, and I would have talked about it anyway, but this was part of my Goldibooks journey. So after I put down the intoxicating Mr. Laval, I thought, all right, well, I don't really know what I want to do at this point, because fluffy romance feels like what I need right now, but it's feeling too fluffy. I want something serious, but all of these other things that I'm picking up feel too serious. I need something in the middle. I need that Goldibooks book. And all of a sudden it came to me in a flash. The Henna Wars by Adiba Jagirdar, which is something that I picked up in Dublin when Joel and I were there. I'll link with a book haul where I talk about all of the books that I got on that trip. This is something I got from the Winding Stair, which was my favorite bookstore in Dublin. I got this delightful bookmark from them, which I actually used when I was reading The Henna Wars because it came from that store. It's got a little puppy on it. And this ended up being the thing that got me going with my reading. And I think I only actually picked it up on Tuesday, and I'm filming this on Friday, so I finished it last night, or yesterday afternoon, actually. So it read pretty quickly as well, which was great. And I could do the same thing I did with The Gungle Abroad last week, where I complained about it a lot, even though I liked it, because there are elements of this that are clumsy and a little clunky. Structural things, like there are two friend characters, or people who are described as friends of the protagonist in the book, but they don't have a friend relationship, like, at all. So there are things like that where if you wanted to pick this book apart, you kind of could. But overall, I did like it, and I like a lot of the things that it does. So I'm not going to do that thing I did last week where I complain a lot about it. I'm just going to go with it. And ultimately, this is a young adult book. It is introducing a lot of complex ideas into a queer young adult relationship book, which I kind of appreciate. So this ends up dealing with issues of cultural appropriation, racism, immigration, acceptance, coming out, and being outed by people. It deals with a lot of really heavy, hefty things. And cultural identity as well, which is interesting because when I started reading it, I don't know what prompted me to do it, but I looked up online reviews of this book, and there are mostly positive reviews of it, but there are some negative reviews of it. And a lot of them point to the protagonist saying, like, her whole life revolves around being Bengali, which is funny to me because she is Bengali. She was born in Bangladesh, and her family immigrated to Ireland because her parents kind of wanted new opportunities for their children, her and her sister. So she's literally Bengali. And some of the people who made those comments in reviews would even say, like, I live in Bangladesh and I'm not as Bengali as her. And, you know, it just kind of made me think about immigration stories. Like, my grandparents immigrated from Italy a long time ago. Like, my grandmother immigrated as a child when she was 5. And my grandfather immigrated like when he was about 21 or 22, immediately after World War II. And all the years that they lived in the United States, they never stopped being Italian or acting Italian, talking about Italy, eating Italian food. And even my mother, who was born in the United States, somebody could be flippant and make the same comment about her. It's like, oh, her whole life revolves around being Italian. It's like, well, it's a big part of her life. My mother even went to Paris, and she is the only person I know who has been to Paris and claimed not to have had a single good meal. I know people who have had bad meals in Paris, but she's the only person I know who has not had a single good meal. But the reason is, it's French food. She prefers Italian food. So it's like a weird flex to comment on an immigrant family for maintaining their connection to where they're from. Especially when there are interesting things. In the beginning of the book, they go to a wedding, a Bengali wedding in Ireland. One of the comments had specifically referenced even they're having Bengali weddings in Ireland. But this Bengali wedding in Ireland has been adapted for Ireland. Nishat, the protagonist, is a bridesmaid and comments and says, if this was a real Bengali wedding, there wouldn't even be bridesmaids and things like that. So it does some interesting things with an immigration story and talking about, adapting to other countries and other ways of life that are pretty heavy for a young adult book, and I ultimately really appreciate that. And the conversation about cultural appropriation is very central to the plot of the book, because at that wedding, Nishat, our protagonist, who, by the way, a lot of the other comments are that she's unlikable. I really just think she's a teenager in that way that some teenagers can be, not all teenagers, but some can be very self-involved. Some people have to learn to get outside of their head, but I think she's also just really defensive because she is treated in racist ways and can't act on them because she is actively the minority, and who's going to understand and who's going to defend her. So when people tell her that the food she brought for lunch stinks, who is she going to complain to? She kind of pulls inward based on that and gets very defensive. And she is self-involved in the way that many teenagers are, I think. But yeah, so I'm willing to go on a journey with her, even though she's not, strictly speaking, a likable character. But anyway, she goes to that wedding at the very beginning of the book, where she runs into Flavia, who is the other person on the cover. Flavia is someone she knew when they were in earlier years of school, but then Flavia went to a different school, like moved and went away for a while, and ultimately they re-meet at the wedding, but Flavia ends up back at the same school. At the wedding, Nishat sort of has this realization. She had this very intense attraction to Flavia that she thought it was friendship as a child. Now she realizes it is a crush. And at the wedding, she decides she's going to come out to her parents as a lesbian. She comes out and they don't do anything. Like, they have no response. They just don't want to talk about it at all. Which reminded me of the book Ma and Me by Putsata Rang. Wonderful memoir. She has to sort of keep coming out to her mother because every time she comes out, her mother ends up not really absorbing the message, and that sort of seems to be what's happening at the beginning of the book, and the sort of devastation of coming out and having it not even make an impact at all. So then school starts again, and the business class that she is taking is having a competition. Set up a business, and at the end, whoever has a combination of the most success with their business and has the best business plan and creates the most solid business will win an amount of money that's not insignificant to a teenager. Wouldn't be insignificant to me either. So Nishat decides, I really like doing henna. Why don't I paint henna for people? That's what I'll do. So that's her business plan. Flavia is an artist who has become obsessed with henna at the wedding and decides that she's going to do the same thing. So they have competing businesses, and that is the title, The Henna Wars. So it's a really interesting book. I enjoyed it. Like I said, it deals with a lot of really sort of heavy things and in very interesting ways. So I ended up really liking this book. It sort of is the one that got me out of that Goldibooks thing. I found the book that is fluffy enough in that it is a young adult romance, but serious enough that it deals with cultural appropriation in really interesting and heavy ways. It doesn't have easy answers for them either. And racism and what it is to be someone in a minority culture going to school with a bunch of white people who don't really understand you and don't necessarily want to understand you. So this was a really interesting book, and it is available in the United States. So I'll have affiliate links to all of these books that are available in the United States in the description box down below if you would like to check them out. So that was my next read, and it was the first successful read of the week for me in my Goldibooksing process. Then, as I said, I finished The Henna Wars yesterday morning, like right around the time I was having breakfast or maybe getting into lunch. And then last night I was thinking to myself, Joel is traveling for work and I don't feel like watching a movie right now. So let me just pick up something quick. And I thought about it and realized I hadn't read Heartstopper Volume 5, which I purchased earlier this year. So I thought, that'll be really fast. Let me just read that. So I picked it up and finished it last night. And after I finished it, I went to rate it on the Storygraph and just got curious. What have I rated the other books in the Heartstopper series? And I realized I haven't read volume 4. I accidentally jumped to volume 5 and didn't even really notice until I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have known. If I hadn't seen that I was missing a rating for volume 4, I would not have known. And I don't think that's necessarily a knock on Heartstopper. It sort of recaps a little bit in the beginning to let you know where you are in the series and what has happened to this point. Also, I've watched the TV series and so I'm familiar enough with it. But it does feel like some big things happened in volume 4. I feel like also, because it had been a while since I read one of the Heartstopper books, I think I just had thought that I had forgotten details, but no, I just missed a whole book. So I read volume 5, and now I need to go back and read volume 4. I might try to do this weekend, just so I'm officially all caught up with the series. But also, it'd be fun to it was nice to read something in one sitting, and I think I could duplicate that with Heartstopper volume 4. So if you're unfamiliar, the Heartstopper series centers on Nick and Charlie. It's a series on Netflix in the United States as well. That series is charming, so watch it. It's great. And the books are very much the same. Lots of cinnamon bun energy and magic. In the beginning of it, Charlie has been reeling from bullying that he's experienced at the school because he was outed. And he's doing better now, but he becomes infatuated with Nick, who's a little more unsure. Obviously, you can't talk about the sequels without talking about what happens in the first book, because by the end of the book, Nick and Charlie do become a couple. Nick realizes that he's bisexual. So you kind of can't talk about any of the other books without talking about them being a couple. And it's literally on the covers of the book, all of the books, so it's not really a secret. But that's the Heartstopper series. It's really sweet, and Volume 5 was no exception. So during this whole Goldibooksing process that I was on, I was working on the audio of The Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden. This had been one of my most anticipated books for the middle of 2024. I'll have a link to the video where I talk about all of those books in the description box down below. I had gotten an advanced reader's copy of this from Avid Reader Press, at least partially because I just love the cover of this book. It's so pretty. It's so pretty. But the book is actually available now. It's out in stores. It's no longer coming up. And I actually had access to the book on audio. So I thought, why don't I just do that on audio? There's like lesbian intrigue in here, so that'll help me get out of my gay male box the way the Hannah Wars did. And that'll be fun as well. Now, I can't speak too much about where this book goes because it feels like if you talk about things that happen in the second half of the book, you start to spoil it a little bit. And that is because The Safekeep surprised me a little bit by taking on the feel of sort of like a pulp novel and a lot like a psychological thriller. And for that reason, it's important not to talk too much about what happens in the second half of the book. So we'll stick to the setup. And by the way, the fact that there is lesbian intrigue in this book is mentioned on the back of the book. So it's not a spoiler for that. And I will say, I wasn't sure I was liking this book for about the first half. It's really in that second half of the book that you start to realize what Yael van der Wouden is doing, what she is using this structure and this format to do. The structure is familiar. It has, again, that sort of feeling of an old classic pulp novel. Of course, in an old classic pulp novel, one of these characters would be male, and they're not. But even the lesbian twist on this situation doesn't feel unfamiliar anymore. There was a book by, I think it was Christine Mangan, that sort of has a similar vibe to it. So even the lesbian twist doesn't feel all that original. And that's why in the beginning of this book, for about the first quarter, maybe the first half, I wasn't sure that I was liking it. But it really goes in some interesting, fascinating directions after that, and I can't get too far into them. The premise of this book is that you have Isabel. It's set in 1961, and Isabel is living in her family home. But this is the home her family settled into. She was a child when they moved to this house. But now, after all this time that has passed, it feels like her family home. She's very entrenched in her ways and regimented. And a lot of that has to do with this house. It feels like part of her identity, and she doesn't leave it very much. And she makes realizations about herself along the way that sort of let you know why she doesn't venture out too far. And her brothers, Hendrik and Louis, live elsewhere. But the thing is, Isabel does not actually have a claim to this house because their uncle found the house for them during World War II, and they moved there. There are a lot of characters in this book who have been displaced and are living with the impact of displacement because of war, which is something that we can certainly relate to now. It deals a lot with the after effects of war and trauma in ways that I think a lot of us can relate to now. And I would say it does it better than Night Watch by Jane Ann Phillips, which just won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. So it deals with a lot of the psychological ramifications of trauma and the after effects of that and how it doesn't just go away over time. And the damages of war and the things that happen in wartime linger and continue to have ramifications and impacts after it. And that is what this book is really concerned with. And that is the thing that elevated it to such a high level for me. So the uncle purchased the house. The title of the house is actually in his name. And when he dies, Louis, the oldest brother, will inherit the house. And so Isabel is at least partially entrenched because she has such a precarious place in the world. And having the protagonist be a woman who doesn't have a lot of options in the world really hammers in a lot of the points as the book continues to go. So she's essentially on borrowed time with the house because she knows at some point Louis is going to get married, and the idea is that he will move into this house and she will have to be elsewhere when that happens, but she loves the house. So Louis, something of a philanderer. He has serially dates women, and his latest girlfriend is Eva, who is kind of opposite of Isabel. She's very kind of loose, not very controlled, and she comes to stay at the house because Louis is going to be away on business for a while. And Isabel doesn't want Eva there, but she doesn't have a say because this isn't her house. Effectively, even though the uncle is still alive, it belongs to Louis. And of course, there are conflicts between Isabel and Eva when Eva first gets to the house, and then that, as the back of the book sort of implies, it turns into lesbian intrigue. But what this book is ultimately doing is it's using this familiar setup to explore the consequences of war, as I said, and it does it in really interesting ways. I did see a big twist coming, I will say. However, the way it plays out is still very satisfying to me. And it's just so interesting. I kind of want somebody else to read this book so I can talk to them about it. Because I just found it to be really intriguing, which is all I can say because I can't tell you the direction that it ultimately ends up going. All I can say is that it explores war and the consequences of war and what humanity does during wartime and what it is to be displaced and what it is to claw your way back from being displaced. So I would absolutely recommend The Safekeep by Yael van der Wouden to you. I just really thought this was an interesting story, and I ultimately liked the way it uses this familiar setup to get at very weighty themes that really make you think, and there are not easy answers to be found in this book. And I kind of want to talk to somebody about it, so I need to encourage, if you want to read The Safekeep, please do. Again, there will be links to bookshop.org down below, or try your local independent bookstore, or go to your local library. So that's where my reading ended. I actually finished the audio of The Safekeep this morning, and I have not decided what my next audio is going to be. I think I know, but I'm going to, because I don't tend to listen to audiobooks very much on the weekend, I'm going to wait until I actually am ready to start an audiobook to really make sure. So I'm not even going to mention what I think the next audiobook is going to be. And now that I have taken a detour into Heartstopper after I finished The Henna Wars, I am looking to make Hombrecito by Santiago Jose Sanchez my next book. This is another book that had been included in my most anticipated books from the middle of 2024. I mentioned in my mid-year book Freakout, which will also be linked down below, that this was the 2024 release that I wanted to get to. Although I will be doing a video about books coming out later this year. Still, I'm working on it. But so this was the book that I said was an upcoming release I was most looking forward to. And actually this week it has been published. So it is out there in the world for you. I've already heard some feedback from people who have picked it up and really enjoyed it. And I included it in my book haul because I actually got this for free. Riverhead sent it to me. Oddly, after I did that video where I called it one of my most anticipated books for the middle of 2024, just before it was released, Riverhead reached out to me and asked if I wanted a copy, and yes. So here it is, and I'm so excited to read it, and I think this is going to be my next book. I talk about it a lot in my book haul, which will be linked down below as well. So you can get more information about Hombrecitos there and see some of the comments from people who have already been reading it and enjoying it as well. So that's everything I've been up to this week. I would love to hear what you've been reading, watching, loving. I have not started watching the new season of The Bear yet. I haven't even started watching the new season of Hacks yet. So I need to catch up to that. But anyway, I'd love to hear what you've been up to. If you have made it this far, I appreciate your time as always. I just want you to know that any amount of time that you spend on any of my videos is always appreciated, and I will be back, hopefully with Teddy. Until then, happy reading.